Okay, so for this lecture, I want to talk a little bit about the novel as a Bildungsroman genre. So this is a term, a literary term that we use to describe a certain type of novel that traces the development of a character from their childhood into adulthood or maturity. So I think this novel definitely falls within that category, as we have Pai's life journey from being a child to being a sort of more mature adult mindset. We get to see that evolution or transformation of his character over time, and the events that take place that really go about into maturing his character and teaching him life lessons. So we're going to see or talk a little bit about how this novel fits into that Bildungsroman genre. And the word Bildungsroman, just if you take it apart, the word roman means novel, and Bildungs is a German word for growth or development. So it literally translates to a novel of formation or development. And if you're thinking of an example in your own mind of ones you maybe know already, if you've heard of or read or watched the musical Oliver Twist, that would be a kind of Bildungsroman. So there are certain conventions or qualities that this type of novel this genre has in common. So certain conventions, like usually there's a character who's orphaned or, they're lack parental authority. They're kind of left on their own at a certain point. Maybe they lose their parents early on. Um, but there's usually some tragic element to their life story as a child, and then we get to see how they grow into becoming more of an adult and go through certain life lessons along the journey. But we're really looking at the development of that process of growing, of becoming an adult. So going from being a child and having that kind of innocence and naivety of a child, we're kind of, in that little protected bubble of childhood. And then the events that kind of start to happen to us in adolescence, where we grow and learn about the reality of life. So, if we think of some of the conventions of the Bildungsroman genre, um, there are certain things that they have in common. So, if we look at this definition that I've included on the slide, the subject of these novels, or the protagonist, we usually see them develop in terms of their mentality, the way they think about the world. We see their character grow, become more mature, learn sometimes very harsh life lessons, realities about human nature, and sometimes, the brutality of real life. Um, those kind of experiences happen. So if you think about your own process of going from childhood to maturity, some of you probably are in this phase yourself right now. Various experiences happen to you during your adolescence that really open your mind in some ways, make you more mature, more wise, more experienced. Sometimes it's a difficult process becoming an adult, and it can be a period of crisis and conflict. So Pi will undergo a kind of spiritual crisis as well. We've seen his kind of childhood as almost an idealized vision of, family happiness and, humans and animals cohabiting in this zoo environment and just loving all of man or God's creations. But we'll see how there's a kind of almost like a breakdown of some of this idealism related to childhood, and there's moments of crisis. We were already seeing Pi in this critical life testing circumstance of his survival. So he's going to learn and grow as a character through this process. And then eventually, if you survive the growth through your adolescence, you will eventually reach a point of maturity. So the Bildungsroman really traces this development of a character until they reach a mature uh, position, subject position, that usually involves like a stronger sense of oneself. So they have a stronger sense of their own identity and a new sort of relationship with the world. So you understand the world a little better as you get older, and you're not so naive or innocent. So there's a bit of a loss, or it's a sad transition for many people when you lose that your childhood, right? You can never go back to that childhood innocence that you once had once you start seeing the world for what it is and humanity for what it is. So it can be also a period of loss or transformation where parts of your innocence are lost. And we see that with Pi's, losing his family, losing his homeland, and being sort of in this transition period. So right now we sort of see him on the lifeboat and he's consumed with his basic survival. So he's kind of in this in-between phase, a kind of liminality, an experience where he's kind of stuck in the middle of transforming. So he's in the middle, sort of almost like his adolescence period, where he has to learn all these sort of life lessons before he has this sort of mature adult relationship with the world. So we'll watch and read how Pi grows as he develops from a child to an adult. So I want you to pay attention to that transformation and the different kind of life lessons he learns about himself, his identity, his relationship with others, and basic things he learns about humanity and the world around him. So that is a Bildungsroman. So another way of sort of understanding the Bildungsroman as a genre, you can sort of think about it in terms of your own life, some of the things that might happen to a person between their childhood and then their adulthood. So as we transition into adults, certain things mark that, what we call a coming of age time in our lives. So when we use the term coming of age, it's sort of that Bildungsroman transformation that we're talking about. So it could be one big turning point, like Pi, a traumatic situation of losing your parents in ship accident. It might be, some other traumatic experiences, but, our transformation into adults usually is not so traumatic as Pi's. He's this very sort of extreme case, but, certain things mark our transition into adulthood. We learn maybe lessons about cruelty. Other people can't always be trusted. We might be, face the reality of deception or corruption in politicians or adults or authority figures who care for us. You might learn lessons about yourself, that you have weaknesses and flaws, that we're all, not perfect. No adult is perfect, right? So you kind of learn about human flaws, that human beings are not perfect, that we have weaknesses, we have breaking points, we are given to, sin and corruption, but that, there's sort of goodness as well. So the complexities of life are very much a part of that coming of age process. But other things, good things too. So you might fall in love for the first time during your coming of age process. You gain more independence as a person. So as you go from a child to an adult, you become more independent. You might get your license. You might, start dating. You might end up, romantic relationships for the first time. All these kind of are stepping stones in the journey to adulthood. So we kind of think of, you don't become an adult until maybe you get married or you buy a house or you get your first real job or something like that. But so there are certain, large life events that kind of mark our transition into adulthood. But we get to see how Pi experiences a kind of traumatic break. The loss of his childhood innocence occurs during this period of time where he is alone in the Pacific Ocean, and he's lost his family. So it's just him, and he has to learn to rely on himself. So he's gaining that independence that we kind of associate with maturity. So these are some things we can look for, and we'll trace Pi's development over the course of the novel. So I sort of want us to start thinking about what is he learning about himself through this experience of being stranded and having to worry and think about his own basic survival day after day after day while on this boat. So I want us to think about that. So what does he learn about himself? What does he learn about human nature? What does he learn about the world in general? So these are sort of our central questions that we can start thinking about as we see his character transform and grow over the next sort of section of the novel.